Let's get it.
So next we're going to be talking about classical conditioning. Our boy Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. So for an example, we have a worker who takes a drink after work and typically arrives home around 10 p.m. By the time he gets home, the level of alcohol in his blood is starting to drop. It leads to the drive for more alcohol to restore the good feelings of drunkenness. Over time, returning home itself is going to trigger this desire for alcohol. So the conditioned stimulus, which is the low blood alcohol level, leads to the unconditioned stimulus, the irritability and discomfort. Eventually, the unconditioned stimulus becomes coming home after work, leads to the unconditioned response, that irritability and discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
So, to not be uncomfortable, we're obviously going to indulge our addiction, which reinforces the problem by giving us a dopamine rush and a sense of comfort and stability.
Mm-hmm.
After that, there is also a period of an extinction that can occur when the stimulus is presented, but the expected reward is never given. And this has allowed procedures to be used in the treatment of addictions, such as cue exposure with response prevention. Because if you have the cue, let's say you have a marijuana addiction, and one of your triggers is the sound of a grinder grinding, if you use a grinder to grind up tea, and then you make tea instead of hitting your bowl, well, your response is not the same, like, dopamine rush that you're used to after hearing that sound, and this may lead you into a period of extinction, which may help with quitting.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that the cues that are related to the use are presented. I already just explained all that. After the period of extinction, the associations build up during conditioning are not completely forgotten, and the phenomenon of spontaneous recovery can be observed. So even if you go into a period of extinction where you no longer get triggered by those things that triggered you before, there are ways that can come back. Because like Michael and I have said, once you are an addict, you are an addict, right?
Yeah.
So my biggest thing here with the classical conditioning is that it's clear to me that it's not entirely, well, it is under our control, but there are multiple levels to the decision making of I'm going to take my next fix.
Mm-hmm.
There's the biological addiction, there is the mental conditioning, and there is just those two, I believe. Just those two. So with those two layers constantly working in tandem and trying to find that next fix, you need to be strong enough in yourself to say rationally, no, that's not what I'm going to do. And it's not easy. I'm not saying that is something that is going to be easy.
Yeah. I think you need to accept that you are thinking irrationally.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be pretty hard to do because when you're thinking, regardless of what you're thinking about, it feels rational at the time. I think
Right.
we've all experienced that before. So yeah, having to kind of acknowledge that, like, I can't even trust what I'm thinking right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be pretty difficult, you know?
I agree with you. So next we're going to move into the psychological and the physiological aspects of addiction and how being an addict can express itself symptomatically in our bodies and in our mental states. But like I said earlier, we are not medical students. We are not doctors. This should not be medical advice. This should just be of interest to you. And if you want to go further and learn and you have any actual questions, please consult your physician. So, the psychological aspects of addiction. You might have some difficulty controlling your impulses. You might have a strong need for excitement, stimulation, immediate gratification. You may have huge feelings of rejection, hostility, aggression, anxiety, or depression. People may turn to drugs to blot out their emotional pain. Classic and operant conditioning are at play in addiction, and triggers can overcome someone's self-control without pre-conscious deterrence. So, since addiction requires three components: biological factors, psychological factors, and cultural and social factors, it's a mosaic of different influences. Thus, in my opinion, it's impossible to say that addiction is caused by one of these things alone, which, in my opinion, means that the treatment of addictions cannot solely be based on the biological factors or the psychological factors. It needs to be all encompassing. So then, for the physiological aspects, each substance has differing physiological effects on the body when used chronically, but some generic side effects of chronic substance use disorders are irritability, anxiety, paranoia, changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature, nausea, vomiting with accompanying weight loss, and insomnia. But that is just a small list, and because we are all such different people, personality-wise, but I'm talking biochemically at this point, there's going to be a lot of different symptoms for a lot of different people that express in Alex, but don't express in James. And that does not mean that they're not a part of the addiction. That just means that Alex and James are two very, very different people.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to treatments, there's lots of options. What do you think, Michael, when it comes to an addiction, a hypothetical addiction? What would be your ideal all-encompassing treatment plan?
Wow, that's a lot to
Put you on the spot. I'll help you out, don't worry.
I don't know. So I think one of the biggest struggles would be filling your time if you're not using, because it's not just the time that you were using, it's the time you spent trying to get your next fix, all of that. So I think a big part of the recovery program, I think, would be replacing the bad addiction with a good one, like exercise or meditation, something like that, scrapbooking.
Right.
Just to fill in like the void that is those old habits, I guess. I don't know. I know in AA they talk about kind of redeeming your past self, like apologizing to the people you've hurt because of that illness.
Right.
I guess I'd throw that in there too.
I would say it's very important to have a space where you're allowed to come to terms with what you have done and feel welcomed and supported, as opposed to alienated and punished. Because when it comes to treatment, at least for me, I already know that I up, right? So now I'm looking for a way to get out of it. I'm not really looking for guilt or pity. I'm looking for support, understanding, and conversation, if you get what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think part of the AA kind of apologizing for your past stuff is it's about taking control of your life again, because, when those things occurred, you were out of control. Something else was controlling kind of what you were doing. So it's about like reclaiming it almost. Yeah, I don't know. That is a tough one. I mean, it would be cool to go to one of those rehabs that's like $100,000 or whatever, and you just get pampered for 30 days.
Yeah.
I'd get behind that.
I was going to say the only other thing that I would add is Michael said briefly, but some physical activity, because we've talked about this in a bunch of different episodes. The endorphins, the dopamine rush, the catharsis that you feel after you've taken and gotten your fix of your substance, a lot of that can be replicated in physical activity. And yes, it's harder, and yes, it requires a lot more work before and after, but like Michael said, if you can find a way to replace, that'll change your life drastically in 2 weeks, let alone a year, let alone 5 years. So,
Yeah. And I mean the runner's high is a real thing. Like you can actually feel it kind of coursing through your body. Um, One scary thing though that I sometimes think about is, if you're addicted to a drug that kind of that attaches to dopamine, like I think crystal meth, for example, kind of like opens up your dopamine receptors, is that like chemically speaking, you will never be as happy as you were when you took that drug.
right.
Like it's physically impossible for that much dopamine to be going through your brain naturally. And that's pretty crazy to think about for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that would be a word of caution because it's like if I ever decide to hit crystal meth, that means nothing on the planet Earth will ever satisfy me that way ever again.
And also like the worst part is that nothing will satisfy you like the first hit either. The second hit of crystal meth won't be the same as the first.
Exactly.
Um,
It's a
so yeah, I
slippery
mean
slope.
it's a slippery slope, and I mean that's I think the base level of an addiction for a lot of people is searching for the same high they got the first
Mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll never find it. It will never be like that again.
I was just going to say, in terms of what my research has shown, the two main treatments are medications, and that's broken up into a couple of categories. And the other is psychotherapy of some sort, that being the examples we have are cognitive behavioral therapy and psychoanalysis. So for medications, there's pharmacotherapy, which is when medications are used to reduce the intensity of withdrawal symptoms, reduce alcohol and other drug cravings, and reduce the likelihood of use or relapse for specific drugs by blocking their effect in your body.
Okay, so that's like methadone,
Yeah.
right?
I don't know what methadone is, but
It's
okay,
methadone.
okay, sure, I'll take it. I'm going to
I
take
think
your
it's
word
methadone.
for
Yeah,
that. I'm going to
yeah.
take it. The primary goal of medication assisted treatment is for the patient to achieve fully sustained remission. Then there's psychiatric drug therapy, which uses drugs to alter your brain chemistry and relieve psychiatric symptoms. And then there's alternative mind mood medicine, which uses natural products that claim to have psychological effects. So, in my mind, the issues is that all of these are working under the disease model of addiction that says we are biologically broken and our mind's activity relies solely on our brain and our genetic composition. So while antidepressants may work for patient A, say me, patient B, say Michael, has a completely different neurochemistry than I do. So for a problem that has 3 tiers of influence, it's illogical, in my opinion, to only try and treat it as a biological problem.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, and I know for sorry, this is I guess slightly off topic
Go
here,
ahead,
but I
go
know
ahead.
for kind of like kids and adolescents, and anyone whose brain isn't fully developed or
Mm-hmm.
body,
Mm-hmm.
if they develop an addiction, like a physical addiction, their body actually develops around it. So I read this article about teen vaping, specifically in like 13 to 16-year olds.
Yeah.
And since their brain is still developing, it's like their dopamine receptors specifically is what's targeted, I think. Um, and the teenagers who were vaping a lot and addicted to nicotine, their brain was actually developing dopamine receptors that could only be activated by nicotine coming through their system.
That's
And I
insane.
mean, yeah, so once they're there, they don't go away, right?
Right.
So even 50 years from now, those kids, if they never vaped again after those dopamine receptors were developed, they would still have them in their brain. So if they ever consume nicotine again, like those receptors would be activated for the first time in years and years and years.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So,
Um,
since it's such a deep-seated problem in your mind, like, it seems from the way our conversation has gone, Michael, that this is like a bottomless pit of despair and there's no solution. But I don't think that's what you should take from this, because it's like while you still have those receptors and they grew around these 13 to 16-year-old kids, they're still hopefully going to find satisfaction elsewhere. So while there are dopamine receptors that are only able to be activated by nicotine, they will also have dopamine receptors that are activated elsewhere. Because from my understanding, and I could be completely wrong about this, nicotine is not to the point of crystal meth where it's once and done. It's close, but it's not once and done. So,
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Once and done.
I'm pretty sure it's crystal meth where after your first hit, your brain is chemically rewired to need it to the point where,
Oh.
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like you get addicted instantly.
Exactly.
Basically.
Once and done.
Yeah.
Once and done. But I'm going to look that up because I don't know.
No, and I think it's also about the nature of different drugs, right? So I think like heroin, for example, you like put the heroin in your arm or whatever, or smoke it or something, and then you have the effect of heroin. Marijuana, it's the same thing. You smoke it and then you are high on marijuana, whereas nicotine, for example, you consume it and the buzz or whatever lasts for about 30 seconds and then it goes away. So the nature of nicotine is that you keep consuming and you consume more and more and more and more quickly. I think you would need kind of a different approach for those like different styles of addiction, you know?
It's like how the antidepressants would affect us differently because we're biochemically different. So would the drugs, because each drug is different and it's trying to achieve a different state of euphoria. Or it has a different pathway of getting you there. So then the second biggest portion of treatment for addictions are some form of psychotherapy. And we're going to be going over cognitive behavioral therapy and psychoanalysis. But Michael and I aren't actually going to talk about psychoanalysis because Kale and I talked about that in episode 2 in season 1. So you guys can go listen to that if you want. But cognitive behavioral therapy, as I understand it, I'm going to leave you guys with a video that's 1 minute and 47 seconds long. So if you want to learn more, it has everything you need to know about it. But cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on inappropriate or inaccurate thoughts or beliefs to help individuals break out of distorted ways of thinking about who they are and their actions. It may be sourced from learned patterns of unhelpful behavior. The goal of cognitive behavioral therapy is to find better ways to cope with our psychological problems. So the doctor and the patient work in tandem to find the source of the problem and then create actionable, workable goals to step out of the negative behavioral loop so that we do not return to the problem behavior. And then this involves the changing of our thinking patterns, which is a 4-step process. It starts with recognizing the dissonance between our own perception and objective reality, then understanding ours and others' behaviors and motivations. It allows us to learn problem-solving skills to deal with tough situations, and it also allows us to develop more self-confidence in our abilities and our knowledge. So, I don't know if you've ever actually had a therapeutic practice before, Michael.
Like therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's different schools of therapy, and I'm not going to sit here and talk like I know because I did not take a Bachelor of Psychology. But from my understanding, the biggest difference between cognitive behavioral therapy and psychoanalysis is that psychoanalysis, the doctor is the professional and has all the answers, and you are going to them for help. In cognitive behavioral therapy, the doctor has half of the answers, but half of the answers are located in your problems, in your traumas, so you're half the solution as well. For me, that seems like a more effective method, because think about it like when you were younger. If I gave you a Pokemon card, whatever, if it rips, it doesn't matter, you didn't buy it. But you spend $5 of your own when we're 7 to go to Walmart, buy a package, and you get a crazy pull out of this Pokemon card. You're going to take a lot more care of that, right? Because its responsibility is yours. Like, it's attached to you. I feel the same way about the healing process in therapy.
Yeah, right, because you can have the best doctors in the world trying to cure your addiction, but if you don't want to not be addicted anymore, then nothing will happen. That's the reality. Like, it needs to be you first.
Right, right.
So I think that's a good point, that ultimately you have the answer, but it's the doctors or the professionals that can kind of help you find it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not like you couldn't find it on your own, but think of them as like guides, and we are blind men being walked through a forest. You know, they'll help us get in between the steps, but we actually do have the ability to get there. And I think that's another hugely important thing, is believing that you can get there. We talked about the fear earlier, how I've quit once and I failed. I don't want to do it again because what if I fail again? Failure is when you stop trying. I said that recently, and I genuinely believe that. Like, if you don't keep putting the effort forward, then yeah, you failed. But you only fail when you stop putting the effort forth.
That's very true.
So, a question to wrap up, and we can just leave this open-ended, discuss our way out of the episode, Michael.
Alrighty.
What do you think? Are we more than our addictions? Does addiction prevent you from being a moral and ethical person? Or can you still be an addict and be a good person?
Yeah, I think you could be an addict and be a good person. Are we talking you're actively addicted or you are in recovery?
Whichever one you want to start with. We can talk about them both.
All right, let's say you're actively addicted. I think it would become very hard to act morally in every situation. Because if you're willing to, give up your job, like, food, your house, shelter, all of that for a substance, I don't think it would be very hard to try and steal from someone,
right.
Or take advantage of someone. But then again, I don't believe that. Like, I'm a big believer in, like, the irrationality, like, it takes over you, So I would argue maybe it's not even you that's really acting immorally. You are out of control now. Something else is in control of your life. And, maybe it's your fault, maybe it's not. But, I just think a person who's addicted to something, they're almost not the same person before they were addicted. They have changed.
I think that's very important. And what you said there about the irrationality, that's what I've been trying to get at and trying to articulate, Michael, at least for me, is that I think anybody who is in an addiction, whether it's active or recovery, being an addict is a part of who they are. But it is not the entirety of their being. And thus, you cannot logically, in my mind, write somebody off for just being an addict. Because addictions, like drugs, have levels. There are very high-functioning addicts in society.
Yeah.
And I think you shouldn't be, like, I'm not trying to celebrate those people, because obviously we're making an episode about it. Addiction is clearly a bad thing. But people need to understand that not everybody is going to live prototypically, right? And I think, like you said, if you're chasing a drug and it's your only thought and your only worry, then I agree with you. It's going to be hard if not impossible, to be ethical and moral when all you want is the next fix. But I
Yeah.
think, in general, you cannot just walk around and label every addict you see as bad.
No,
Because
no, no.
that's like walking around as an atheist and labeling every theologian you see as bad. It doesn't really make
No,
any sense, right?
yeah, no, I agree. I'm not saying that all addicts are bad. I'm just saying I can imagine it is very, very difficult to act selflessly.
Yes. And I can agree with that 100%.
Yeah. And again, like once they are no longer, actively addicted, I think you can change back. You would become the person you were before, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like something is controlling your mind if you're addicted. So I think it's important to remember that even someone who, could have donated their kidney to you or whatever when they weren't an addict, that means nothing if they are addicted now. You do not know what they are like anymore.
Right.
You don't know what they're willing to do, you know? And there's levels to addiction too, right?
Exactly. You have to be a little cautious because, like Michael said, you never know what somebody is capable of to get their next fix. You never want somebody taking advantage of you. That is something we want to avoid at all costs. But
Yeah, and
I think if you do have addiction close to you and in your family, start with support and open conversation. I feel like that's definitely step one.
yeah, but I think the flip side too is that maybe the addict themselves isn't even aware of what they're capable of doing yet, Like how desperate they really are, and when put in a certain situation, what they would do, you know? So again, I'm not trying to like label all drug addicts
No,
or
no, no.
addicts in general as bad
No,
people.
no,
I'm
no.
just saying,
You got to look at both sides of the story, Michael. I am
yeah.
100% for it. I'm 100% for it.
And again, I'm coming back to my irrationality when I'm horny, right? I've done some unfortunate things, right?
Yeah.
That I would not have done if I was in a more controlled state of mind.
Exactly. So, to wrap up, I was on Facebook the other day, and a family member of mine shared this on Facebook. So, I'd like to share it with you, Michael, and with the people who are listening. And it is kind of long, so bear with me. Okay. The title is Dear Addictators. Dear Addictators, I am an addict. I am one of the drunks, druggies, the shopping addicts, or TV junkies that you love to bash whenever someone mentions addiction on social media or you hear it in a conversation. I know it's hard to forgive the things we sometimes do because of our addiction, but I have a question for you. What's the worst thing you've ever done? Obviously, I'm not going to get an answer to this question, but think about it. That thing that you hate that you did. You know, that one thing that not very many people know about. Well, what if everybody did know about it? What if for the rest of your life you were labeled by that one act and you would erase it in a second if you had a chance? That's what being an addict is like, in a sense. Now, I don't feel like being an addict is the worst thing a person can be or do. You, however, might feel like it is the most terrible thing. Don't get me wrong. If I could erase it from my life, I would. In an instant, it would be gone. But I don't have that option. I can't even do what you do and pretend that this thing didn't happen. In order for me to ensure it never happens again, I have to work hard, daily, on making sure that it doesn't. If I don't, my disease will tell me that I can dull the pain, block out the hurt, suffocate the remorse, and not fall back into full-blown addiction. But I will. Do you work hard daily to make sure your worst thing never happens again? Let me guess. You're thinking about it. Addiction is not a disease. It's a choice, isn't it? Yeah, it starts with a choice. The same choice that you made when you were young and hanging out with your friends. You drank the same beer that I did. You smoked the same marijuana that I did. You even tried the same line of white stuff somebody put in front of you at a party. You were able to walk away and not take it to the extreme. Maybe you didn't have the pain, trauma, and sorrow to numb that I did. Since I have the disease, I made that stupid choice. I will spend the rest of my life either struggling or staying high or fighting to stay clean. You don't see children pretending they're dolls and stuffed animals are dope sick. It's not cops and junkies that kids play out in the streets. When is it the last time you talked to a little girl who told you that she couldn't wait to grow up so she could turn tricks to feed the insatiable hunger? So she could turn tricks to feel the insatiable hunger of her drug addiction. My best friend didn't blow out the candles as a child wishing for a substance abuse disorder because she couldn't wait for the day her kids would go to foster care. Her family would shun her. She would be so hopeless on the cold ground with nowhere to go and not a soul that gave a damn. Nobody wants to have a substance use disorder. Some of us still do. You made the same choices too. You got lucky that it was me and not you. I pray that you don't have to reevaluate these opinions because you find out your child or parent is an addict. If you do, just know that I will accept you. I will help your loved one. Do you know why I would do that? Because we are good people who just want a chance to live like everyone else. So please, before you write another post bashing people who are suffering, before you lean over to whisper about the junkie who walked by you, not only are you hurting the people who have the disease, you could be hurting everybody that loves them. You are pushing them back towards that addiction that numbs the pain caused by your judgment. You have people on your friends list, or people that may overhear you at work, who have children who are suffering right now, this moment, from addiction. What did they do to deserve the awful things you put out into the universe that do nothing but perpetuate hate and judgment? What right do you have to judge? Addiction is a disease. You may have a right to an opinion, but no matter what, hurting people is wrong. That is all that the post had to say, but I think it's very apt because at the end of the day, I'll allow you to have the last word on this, Michael. We're all humans, and I think the more love we can share to get ourselves through this existence together, the better off we're going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, acknowledging, I like that she said it, like it could have been you, right? It could have been any of us. We got lucky, right? Because addiction isn't just, some degenerate who likes to get messed up all the time. Maybe it's a firefighter who broke their back and took OxyContin as a painkiller, right? And now they can't get off of it.
Right.
But yeah, I think acceptance, acknowledging that they're not a bad person is probably the most important thing at the end of the day. That there is still some redeemable qualities. There's still something to fight for with that person,
Right. And obviously, everybody's cases are going to be different. There may be addicts who are, quote unquote, too far gone. But I think the gist of what I was trying to get at there is show a little more love and a little less hatred. And I think we're going to be all right. But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, unless you have anything else to say, Michael, it's up to you.
I mean, should we get the addiction hotline number up here right now?
Is there one specific to Canada? I think that would be safe.
I believe so.
Doo-doo.
I feel like that would be a good thing to end this. And like we all know someone in our lives that's, struggled with something. Still struggling, maybe.
Exactly. I will make sure that I put these in all of the episode description. They're available to you. But I've got a couple of numbers that I can read off here now. The first one is Wellness Together Canada, 1-866-585-045. The Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. The Alberta Addiction Helpline is 1-866-332-2322. And where is Saskatchewan? Because you live in Saskatchewan.
I'm sure
I don't,
Alberta won't mind if you phone them instead.
I don't think there's one for. Oh yes, the Saskatchewan Helpline is
Oh, thank
811.
God. 811. That's what they're
811.
telling you to call.
811.
That is typical Saskatchewan, man.
But the only other thing that I would say, and I will leave you an opportunity to say things to the people that you love that might be listening to this, Michael, is if you have issues, man, pick up the phone and call me. I have a life, obviously, but I know how important it is to have real conversations with people that would listen. And I know this can affect not only just the people with the addiction, but the people who live around that person. So if I am in your direct sphere of influence and you need somebody to talk to, then by all means always take that step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm here too as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Michael's
Got us
door
both
is
here.
always open.
Yeah, I'm unemployed right now, so I got nothing but time.
Oh, my laptop is telling me that it's going to die soon, so I think we're going to wrap up here. So I think, most importantly, first of all, Michael, thank you for taking the time to sit here and talk with me for the last however long, because I genuinely thought that this was vital for us today.
Yeah, no, this was my pleasure. I feel like I learned a lot.
Yeah, bro.
Had some good conversations.
That's good. That's good. Mm-hmm. And then for those of you listening, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Fork in the Road podcast. The second half of the season, like I said, it's going to be sporadic, but it will happen, I promise. And look out for some stuff in the future. After we get off this episode, I'm going to talk to Michael about scheduling our argument for the Blasphemy Bulletin. So hopefully that project is going to get under the way soon, and I'll see you guys when I see you. Yeah, bro. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for listening, and have a good rest of your day.
Goodbye. Boom.